Welcome to the recorded version of Solving Communication Issues Within Families, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
Our presenter today is going to be Lakelyn Hogan. Lakelyn holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in marketing with a Communication Studies minor from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a Master's degree in Business Administration with a Graduate Certificate of Gerontology from University of Nebraska-Omaha. Lakelyn's passion for helping others has led her to her current role, which allows her to work with aging adults and their families as they navigate the senior care continuum. And with that, I would like to welcome our presenter today, Lakelyn Hogan. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Steve, for that warm introduction. Hello, everyone. I hope that your day is off to a great start. And I want to start off by saying thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. We're going to talk about a topic that is always a challenge in our line of work, and that is family dynamics. So I'm going to dive more specifically into sibling dynamics in today's presentation. And I know for a fact that many of you are probably in the middle of these complicated relationships. I know I've been in the same boat myself many times. So this topic will hopefully give you some tips on how to help families and siblings and how to stay out of the middle of any conflict that might arise. So on the next slide, let's look at this more specifically. So I wanted to go over the objectives of the webinar, and we'll start off with the hot button issues or the red flags so that you can avoid them or you can be prepared when one of these touchy subjects come up. We'll also get into a lot of tips today and even some checklists to help siblings through this caregiving journey. And then, as always, we'll discuss some resources that can help siblings overcome and even avoid some of these issues. And on the next slide, let's start looking at why there is sibling conflict in a caregiving situation. As we go through the webinar today, I want you to think about your own family and siblings and think about how the caregiving situation would impact your relationship. I know for me, I'm the oldest of 4 siblings, and we were all together over this past Easter weekend, and I thought a lot about our sibling dynamics in relation to this presentation and thought, I can see some potential conflicts coming up when we start caring for our aging parents. They're still very healthy, but it got me thinking. And if you don't have siblings, maybe think of an example of a family that you have been working with or have worked with in your past. But I definitely want you to have a visual when thinking about this topic today. So let's just dive right into it. We all know that sharing isn't easy for brothers and sisters. Many of you remember back to when you were growing up and the challenge of divvying up toys or bedrooms, maybe even sharing a family car could cause some conflict. And I know in my family, sharing household chores led to several conflicts. So some things never change. And according to a research study by Home Instead Senior Care Network, sharing the care of an elderly parent can become a source of conflict for adult siblings. And the research found that in about 43% of U.S. families, one sibling has the responsibility to provide the majority of the care, and in only 2% of families did the siblings split up the caregiving responsibility. When I came across that statistic, it was pretty astounding. Only 2% of families are splitting up the care, or at least splitting it up evenly. And we all know how busy people's lives can get, and staying in touch, even with siblings in the same community, can be difficult at times, but not having regular communication with our brothers and sisters can lead to miscommunication and hurt feelings, and even make it more difficult as we have these candid conversations about what's happening with your aging parent or loved one. So according to Dr. Ingrid Condesis, a siblings relationship expert from the University of Western Ontario, she says that caregiving can either bring families together or cause trouble. And in some cases, it can do both. And these situations can be very emotional. So I know I'm thinking of families that I've worked with who the caregiving situation has brought them together, and others where it has caused a lot of trouble and conflict. So let's, on this next slide, look at a few additional statistics. I think this is some interesting research that provides great insight into the issues that siblings are facing as they try to provide the best care for their aging parents. And this can give you some insight into the family issues faced by your senior clients and their adult children. So first, let's look at the results of a survey. And this survey had about 710 adults in the U.S. and about 380 adults in Canada, and these surveyed individuals were in between the ages of 35 and 64. And this was conducted by the Home Instead Senior Care Network and by the Boomer Project, which is America's leading authority for information and insight about today's Boomer consumer and the fastest growing 50-plus age market. And so these respondents had siblings or step-siblings and are currently providing care for a parent or an older relative, or did provide care in the past 18 months. And what we found was about 46% of caregivers say that their sibling relationships have deteriorated and their brothers and sisters are unwilling to help. We also found that 42% of family caregivers give themselves and their siblings below average grades for the ability to divide the caregiving workload. So let's stop and think about this for a minute. Both the caregiver that's doing the majority of the caregiving workload and their siblings that aren't doing the majority say they really don't know how to provide it, and they feel like they're not doing an adequate job. This made me think of my grandma. She has 6 children, and she currently lives with her oldest daughter, which is my aunt, and she's going to turn 80 this year. She's still in very good health and doesn't need a whole lot of assistance, but I began to notice that my aunts and uncles have taken on different roles in her care. My aunt that she lives with checks in on her daily, makes sure she gets to her doctor's appointments, makes sure she's eating properly, making sure she's taking her medications. And then I've also noticed that her sons have started to really include her in social activities, their children's activities, taking her out to lunch regularly, and they've even chipped in on some of her financial living expenses. So I know as she continues to age and as her needs begin to increase, it'll be interesting to see my family kind of go through the process of divvying up roles and responsibilities. And I think this is very common when multiple siblings are involved. Things are always changing in the situation. And this last statistic that we found, 64% of youngest siblings are the primary caregiver, compared with 57% of the oldest siblings and 49% of middle siblings. I thought this was interesting. So it seems like where the children fall in the lineup kind of affects their chances of being the primary caregiver. So we have some research continuing here on the next slide. And on top of these findings, sibling caregivers may need to deal with another factor. And according to some additional research by Cornell University, gerontologist Carl Pilmer said that favoritism is also alive and well. He conducted a study and found that mothers ages 65 to 75 in and around the Boston, Massachusetts area were perfectly willing to name a favorite among their children. And I know this is just one study, but we have to keep in mind that this might be a factor. And the truth is that birth order and parental preferences do impact caregiving situations in families with multiple siblings. So again, these are just important factors to keep in mind when we're working with families who are making decisions on behalf of their aging loved ones, our aging parent. And firstborns in the family are said to be highly responsible and commanding leaders, while the younger children, or the youngest, is supposed to be supposedly more mild and easygoing and humble. So as these types grow into adult caregivers, it's common that the firstborn feels that it's their job to make decisions for the aging parent, and they also might expect their younger brothers and sisters to fall in line. And I can completely relate to this. I'm the oldest child, and I found myself nodding along as I was reading that statistic, and I seem to be kind of the mother hen when it comes to making sure our family's getting together and that everyone's communicating and keeping in touch. So this might very well translate into my own family as my parents age. But what's interesting is that recent research found that many aging parents have a favorite child whom they want to be the primary caregiver, and they often kind of determine this years before they actually need care. And in 2 out of 3 cases, that favorite is usually the obliging youngest child and not the bossy eldest child. Something interesting that we found. And according to a 2010 study conducted for the Omaha-based Home Instead Senior Care, and also a joint study by Cornell and Purdue universities in 2013, they found that a parent is more likely to become depressed when his or her preference of primary caregiver is not honored. So if you stop and think about that for a second, that can really have an impact on the care of an older person as they age. They might have an idea in their mind of the child that they want to be the primary caregiver, but maybe that child lives across the country and there's another sibling in town that's going to be taking on the majority of their care. So that, again, might play into the caregiving situation. So now that we have some statistics, what can families do? And we're going to look at some solutions here on this next slide. Homestead Senior Care has partnered with sibling relationship expert Dr. Ingrid Kundisis from the University of Western Ontario to develop the 50-50 rule program to help siblings deal with the many issues associated with caring for an aging parent. So the idea behind the 50-50 rule is that when the average age of the siblings are about 50 years old, that's kind of the typical age for when they start caring for their parents, and they also have a need, there's also a need to share the responsibilities between siblings or brothers and sisters 50-50. So we have the kids who are about the age 50, and we're also trying to get the siblings to share the responsibilities 50-50. So that's where the name 50-50 rule comes from. So if you're working with seniors that have adult children around this 50-year-old age, or siblings that are trying to figure out how to divvy up the care, this 50-50 rule program can certainly help. So we've been talking a lot about the conflicts that might come up, and we're going to dive deeper into these sibling conflicts here on the next slide. We know that family caregiving can be very stressful under any circumstance, but there are certain situations that we would consider hot-button triggers. And you probably see these issues come up quite frequently in the families that you work with. So we're going to go through these 5 that I have listed here. The first hot-button issue is illness, and this is probably when a lot of you are in contact with a family. There might be a parent that becomes ill or is facing a decline in health, and that can leave the family facing all sorts of potentially difficult issues, such as who will provide the additional care, how will the care be divided, and siblings can have differing opinions on the type of care that their parent should receive. Just as an example, I've been in a number of situations where the parent isn't thriving, and the professionals have said, a great plan of care would be hospice for this individual. However, one sibling's not ready for mom or dad to go on hospice. For some reason, they have a stigma in their mind around the word hospice, and then their sister is saying, yes, I think hospice would be a great option. So sometimes these types of conflicts arise. Or I'm not sure if any of you have been in a similar situation, but I've had 2 siblings arguing over whether or not mom needs to be moved into an assisted living facility, or maybe the more advanced memory care is a better option. So these types of decisions and these differing views from these siblings can really turn into conflict, and they might look to us as care providers or healthcare workers to be the tiebreaker in the situation, but this is when we need to stay neutral and objective and have the senior's best interest in mind. And to further complicate the situation, many illnesses present changing needs, and the siblings will need to be flexible to address these changing health issues. Another disagreement when it comes to the illness that might cause conflict is the differing opinions in the elder's conditions and capabilities. It's common for family members to have different ideas about what's going wrong with a loved one and what should be done about it. I had a family that I was working with where the son lived in California and his dad lived in the city that I was in, and he insisted that his father, who had Alzheimer's disease, was capable of outings, and he really wanted our caregiver to take him out to socialize, take him out for coffee, maybe go to the park. But then talking to his sister, who lived in town, the man's daughter, she said, that taking her dad out of the home and on outings, he gets really easily confused and gets extremely anxious and starts to have some different behaviors. So these two siblings who had the same father had very different perceptions of what was going on. So it was really a source of conflict in that family. So while illness and changing or differing opinions in the person's capabilities and abilities are certainly a hot button issue, the next one is also money. And I think that's no surprise to many of us. Money often complicates life at any stage, let alone when dealing with an aging parent or an ill parent. And siblings can be forced to make tough caregiving decisions when their loved one's finances are a factor in the equation. Maybe there's one sibling who's the healthcare power of attorney and another is the financial power of attorney, and they're having some differing opinions on mom's care. So it can cause conflict if these siblings aren't seeing eye to eye. Another hot button issue that you might come up against is inheritance. So again, along this financial hot button, while some families contend with a lack of funds to provide the care for their loved ones, others have the temptation of inheritance influencing their decisions. So if siblings are coming from the wrong place in making decisions based on whether they want their parents to save more money or spend more money, it can be a source of conflict. And siblings will need to recognize that this is a highly emotional issue that can easily escalate to a family feud. And oftentimes when it does get to that point when they're fighting over the finances, everyone really stands to lose, especially the senior. They really should at all times, we should be doing what's best for them. So sometimes involving an impartial financial planner might be the best option with money situations, especially those that concern inheritance. And I think in all of these situations, we have to take into account roles and rivalries dating back to childhood because they might rear their ugly head as adults. So we find that oftentimes these adult siblings are back in the sandbox when the family gets together. Their tendencies can grow even more pronounced under the strain of caregiving. I've had a family that I worked with where the two brothers did not get along at all, and for some reason they would only communicate through their sister. And I thought this was kind of strange, but, you kind of go with the flow in this industry and make the best of every situation. And I later learned that one brother was sent to live with his grandparents as a child, and for some reason the other brother really resented him for that to this day. So, you never really know where these roles and rivalries come from, and in this industry, never a dull moment when working with families with multiple siblings. Another hot-button issue is distance. And in today's day and age, families are scattered across the U.S. So siblings who live in the same town or city might be kind of stuck being the caregiver, doing most of the work. And as I mentioned earlier, 43% of families have one sibling that's responsible for the bulk of mom and dad's care. So sometimes those long-distance caregivers can feel left out, or if they do speak up on behalf of mom and dad's care, then the primary caregiver might think that they're meddling or butting in or speaking out of turn, that sort of thing. So again, the primary caregiver might feel that others aren't helping and that they're left with all the work, especially in those long-distance caregiving situations. And another, the final hot button that we have up here is stress. Daily life can be stressful, and family caregiving can make it even more so. Adult caregivers who have started a new job or are raising children can become very overwhelmed when elderly family members need help. So many people today are what we call the sandwich generation. They're stuck in the middle between caring for an aging parent and caring for their own children. So they really have the stress of caring for multiple generations. And siblings who are bearing the brunt of the caregiving may resent their brothers and sisters who are unable or unwilling to help, which could lead to even more stress. And some siblings might even feel like it's a burden to take on the majority of the caregiving duties. So now that we've gone over these hot-button issues, let's look at some additional underlying emotions that caregivers might feel here on this next slide. So another issue that could come up is control. It's important to establish who's the boss in the caregiving situation. Siblings should each have a role if they want one, but I think it's also important to appoint a primary person in the family or a coordinator. And this might be the power of attorney. It could be the oldest child. Maybe it's the person in the family that's in the healthcare field. I know in my family, I am in the caring field, and my sister is also in nursing. So it'll be interesting to see as our parents age, which one of us kind of steps up and takes on that coordinator role. But I think in situations like this, using the word primary caregiver or person in control can really tense the situation. So if we use a word like a coordinator, that care coordinator, that's a better word to use, and it can really foster an environment of collaboration among siblings when that communication is open. And each person or sibling in the family has their own strengths, so giving everyone a role that's important is important, and it helps each person feel that they're a member of the caring team. So as a professional, you can encourage families to sit down together and make a strength-based plan of care for their aging loved one, mom and dad, whoever it might be. I worked with a family that had multiple children, and they were scattered up throughout the U.S. I kind of talked about them earlier, but they ended up divvying up the responsibilities based on the children's strengths. So one of the children he was a physician, and he oversaw his mom's medical needs. And another son, he was a businessman, so he handled all of the finances. The youngest daughter, she worked in the hospitality industry, and she was kind of the social one in the family. So she made sure that her mom was keeping in touch with family through Facebook, email, regular family visits. And in a way, she acted as her mom's event coordinator. So giving people roles based on their strengths can make it easier for them to contribute to the mom or dad's care or the aging loved one's care, and it can make it more enjoyable for them. Another emotion that a caregiver might feel is underappreciated. And there can be a situation where one sibling is doing all the work. I've been talking about that a lot. They're carrying the entire load for the family. And when this person is overworked, underappreciated, everyone will suffer. The caregiver themselves will feel tremendous stress and pressure. And when that person is stressed out, the rest of the family will feel it, including the care recipient. If the primary caregiver is the adult daughter and she's under a lot of stress, her husband might feel it, her children might feel it, and then the aging loved one that she's caring for will certainly also feel it. So it's the last thing that we want to happen, and it's important that we help the primary caregiver as professionals realize that they can't do it alone and they need to manage the stress. So we can suggest that the family calls a meeting and asks for more help from the other family members. Encourage them to come up with solutions. And it's also a time when you can provide the family with resources in the community that might help the primary caregiver in this situation. If they're the only one in town, maybe it's hiring an in-home care company, or maybe it's finding an adult day center for the aging loved one to go to give that primary caregiver a break. Or maybe some of the siblings chip in and help with the little things to make that primary caregiver's life just a little bit more manageable. And as a professional, we can also give that primary caregiver tips on how to manage the stress, and it can really go a long way. So the final issue that we have up here is the perfectionist. And I think we all know these people. They have the mentality of, if I want to do something right, I'm just going to do it myself. And so we've all run across that family caregiver who has the mentality of, no one can care for mom or dad better than I can. And as a professional, our role is that we need to bring awareness to the fact that it's okay to let someone else make the bed, even if they don't make the bed the same way you would make it. Bottom line is it's done. I know in my family, I'm an expert dishwasher loader, which is kind of a strange talent to have, but I can really fit a lot in the dishwasher. I'm really good at it. But my sister, on the other hand, she just throws things in there. Silverware is going all different ways. And I always get so frustrated when she offers to help, so I've just stopped asking her for help and just take it on myself. And we can see primary caregivers start to do this in different tasks. But as professionals, we can just encourage that primary caregiver to let it go. As long as the bed is made, it's made, so just let it go. Your sibling wants to offer to help with something, give them a few tasks, even if they don't do it perfectly. It's something off your plate, and they're also helping contribute to the care. And we know that perfectionist personalities are not everyone's, thank goodness, but it might come up and it might be a source of conflict. So it's certainly something to keep in the back of our minds. So I've gone over a lot of sources of conflict, but let's start talking about the solutions. And on this next slide, I have kind of a checklist for us to go through and for us to help families go through. First is to identify and list the senior's needs. And some of these needs might include medical issues, housing, those activities of daily living, things such as bathing, grooming, restroom assistance. Another one is end-of-life decisions, those wills, advanced directives, long-term care. Another one, meals, how many meals does mom and dad like to eat every day? What type of meals? Those types of things. Housekeeping, scheduling doctor's appointments, and even more importantly, transportation to those appointments. The bill paying, grocery shopping, the simple companionship, who's going to spend time with mom or dad, and then outings. Do they want to get out and about? If so, where do they want to go? And once you have identified these needs and really nailed them down, the next step would be to research the options. And when siblings have identified these needs, the types of services that they might need, the interventions or the care options, this is where you as a professional can come in and help them discover the resources in their community that will help meet those needs. So again, I've talked a lot about having family meetings. I think that's extremely important. And in this case, the family can hold a meeting to discuss who will handle what job, divvy up the tasks, decide on which resources that they're going to implement, and making sure that everyone has a role, everyone has input, and everyone has the opportunity to share their ideas. And finally, plan ahead. I see so many families coming to me in a crisis situation. Rarely do I get the families that have planned ahead. So if we can help families do that, I think it's extremely important. So when these needs and resources are identified, siblings will have a better idea of what will be required from the family. For example, if the person wants to stay home and age in place, then the siblings need to come up with a plan of how they're going to provide support to that parent and in what capacity. So if someone's trying to stay at home and age in place, they might need to figure out, okay, so when mom or dad stops driving, who's going to help with the transportation? Or are we going to bring in an outside resource to help with that? If mom and dad is staying home and aging in place, who's going to be checking in on them regularly? Are we going to schedule visits certain times of the year, that sort of thing? So while this checklist is really helpful, on this next slide, I have some more general tips on how to provide siblings, or general tips to provide siblings here on this next slide. Experts offer a number of recommendations on how to help siblings cope with the demands of family caregiving. So we're going to talk briefly about avoiding family conflicts that can develop between the siblings. So the first thing for families to remember is the importance of talking and listening. I know many people are really good at the talking part. I know myself included, I need to get more. I can always improve on my listening skills. So when adult siblings come together, whether it's in person, by the phone, maybe the long-distance caregivers want to Skype in. Skype is a great tool. But they really need to listen to each other's questions and concerns. Then they can begin to list the resources that their family member will need through this journey. And I talked earlier about how important it is for brothers and sisters to stay in contact and to avoid miscommunication and hurt feelings. And a lot of times listening, we just don't listen. We just want to do. So this is one of those times where listening will really pave the way to success, making sure that we're communicating, listening to one another. The second is encouraging siblings to make decisions together. Working together to make decisions, it really will be key to the family harmony. Seniors, as their needs will change as they age, and so do the lives of the adult siblings. If you start off making decisions together, it will certainly help in the changing environment. Which also brings us to our next point of planning as to why planning and flexibility are so important in caregiver success. As the parents age and need care and the need for care and assistance increases, as a result, families will need to adapt their plan on a regular basis. I've worked with a number of clients over the period of several years, and when they start with us, they're really independent and still able to do quite a bit on their own. And as their needs changed, I've watched the families adapt their plan of care. So that flexibility and planning is really important. And finally, divide up the workload. All of the caregiving tasks should be divided equally if possible. And siblings should consider a division of labor that takes into account each family member's interests and skills, kind of as we talked about earlier, as well as their availability. And this can't be stressed enough. Families need to promote sibling teamwork and decision-makings together. And I think this goes back to those family meetings, setting up regular times to stay in touch. And again, these could be in-person meetings, phone calls, email updates. There's so many different ways today with all of the technology that we have that families can keep in contact and keep each other updated. So if the families set up a caregiving plan and include these regular meeting times, it will go a long way in avoiding miscommunication and misunderstanding. And it's also important to make sure that no one sibling is doing too much. The primary caregiver really needs to ask for help if and when they need it. And the long-distance caregiver should be checking in often and asking, how can I help you as the primary caregiver? These long-distance caregivers, as I mentioned earlier, they might be able to help with online orders. I know I have one family, and the son takes care of ordering all of the meds and all of the supplies online and just has it shipped right to his mom's house. Bill paying can be another task that a caregiver can do long distance, as well as record keeping, appointment scheduling, and so forth. And of course, they can assist with the companionship for their parent via regular telephone calls, sending letters, emails, and for some seniors through Facebook or other social media networking sites. This day and age, our seniors are pretty technologically savvy. I have several seniors that I work with that are on Facebook, and it's a fun way for them to keep in touch with their siblings or their children and their grandchildren and even sometimes their siblings across the U.S. and even the world. And I can't say this enough. I've stressed this over and over that communication is key. So we're going to look more specifically at communication here on the next slide. To have successful communication, kind of like I mentioned earlier, we need to take time understanding the situation. And I think it's important to understand it from each person's perspective. We need to tell the siblings that we're working with that just because their perspectives are different doesn't always mean that they're wrong. And when siblings take the time to learn each other's perspectives, things tend to run smoother. And encourage siblings to spend time with the care recipient and talk to them in person. It's so important for families to see with their own eyes what's happening. And that's why regular visits, especially for those long-distance caregivers or visits with doctors, other healthcare professionals, is key to avoid jumping to conclusions. It really helps the family seek understanding. And I mentioned earlier that family where the son thought that his dad could go on outings and the daughter said, no, those outings make him really anxious. Well, if he hadn't been to visit for about a year. So when he finally came to visit his dad, he realized, okay, well, maybe I kind of spoke out of turn. You're right. Maybe we should have the caregiver come to the home and interact with him more there in an environment that's more comfortable for him. So it can really open up the eyes of a long-distance caregiver by seeking understanding and taking the time to really understand what's going on. And over-communicate is another key to sibling caregiving success. And I can relate this to another family that I worked with. At the time, this particular client, she was receiving assistance in the morning. So we go over there every morning, make sure that she's getting up, make sure she takes her medication, gets breakfast. But she came down with the flu and became weaker for a short period of time. And her daughter, who was her healthcare power of attorney, decided that she needed some extra assistance in the evening getting ready for bed for this short period of time since she was feeling weaker. And when her brother, who took care of all the bills, got the bill in the mail, he was upset because his sister didn't tell him that there was an increase in care. And When that conflict arose, I realized it could have been avoided with a simple phone call from the daughter to the son, or an email between siblings, and that conflict could be avoided altogether. So communication is certainly the key, and over-communication is especially good with those long-distance caregiving situations. And in a lot of families, I hear, well, my sister who does the primary care for my mom, she doesn't reach out to me very often, so how am I supposed to know what's going on? Well, I would say, it's not always the primary caregiver's responsibility to be sending out the information. They're really busy caring for mom or dad, so the other siblings should also take the time to call and check in and on a regular basis, so that kind of, again, takes that off of the primary caregiver's plate. They don't have to worry about, okay, every week I need to make sure I call all my siblings. If the siblings are calling her, then that takes away that extra stress on the caregiver. And I think empathy is also important in communicating and in the caregiving situation. Try to put yourselves in the different roles and understand the perspectives of each sibling. And our body language can even be a way that we can show empathy and we can show understanding. And our posture, our tone of voice, being relaxed and calm can also really aid in the communication process. And finally, honesty. I mean, we can never be too honest, and this goes back to the primary caregiver. Is that caregiver being honest with themselves? Is the workload too much? If so, they must communicate and get help. And before they reach out to their siblings for help, they really need to take a good look at their own caregiving responsibilities and consider, what do I want help with, before they ask their siblings for help. So do I want my siblings to take on certain tasks? Do I want them to give me a break, give me respite every now and then? Or do I feel like I have the care under control, I just need a little more financial support, or maybe I need more emotional support? So if the primary caregiver is honest with themselves about their needs as a caregiver, then they can be honest about what they need from their siblings. And for the siblings, it's important to be honest and realistic about what they can and can't provide their aging loved one. So some examples I thought of, maybe you and your sister, maybe your sister and your mom really don't get along, and every time she comes over, they end up in an argument, and it's really kind of counterproductive. Well, instead of asking her to provide some respite for your mom, maybe you ask her to get the groceries or help pay the bills, take some of those other tasks. Or maybe the brother can't contribute financially to the care for his mom, but he's retired and has some extra time to help out with maybe housework or yard work, or can provide some respite for the primary caregiver in the family. So being honest about the type of help that the primary caregiver needs, and being honest about what the other siblings can and can't provide is key in communicating. And I know some families that you work with, there's just difficulty in communication and decision-making, and you've tried everything, and sometimes it's best to just bring in a mediator or a professional outside of the family. For many of you on this webinar, you might be that mediator that people turn to, and I know I have been a mediator in some situations. But some other examples of professionals that you could turn to are financial advisors, legal counsel, a physician, a social worker, a care manager. So it's important for that mediator to stay neutral and consider the best interest of the aging parent while helping everyone communicate effectively. So now that we've talked about some different checklists, let's go to this next slide about our resources. At the core of the 50-50 rule is a family relationships and communication guide, and you can find this at solvingfamilyconflict.com. And this website's really great. It features practical advice and a wealth of real-life scenarios and expert responses. There's also a checklist that's found there and a lot of additional information and resources. So you, as a professional, can certainly check that out. You can also direct family members to that website. There are also organizations and resources available to help family caregivers learn about their options. So you can encourage family members to do their research and reach out to these resources so that everyone has the opportunity to learn and share ideas And family members can start by going to websites such as eldercare.gov and caring.com. There's also, I'm sure in every one of your communities, a wealth of agencies and organizations that can help. Community organizations such as the Area Agency on Aging. You can even go to the senior's doctor or geriatric care manager for some assistance as well. And taking care of aging family members can certainly be a tough job, and we know that the stakes are high, and sibling relationships and the quality of the senior's care are at risk when conflict comes into the situation. But with new approaches and a focus on building better family relationships, caregiving can make a family even stronger, and really that's our goal. We want the family to come together around the senior and do what's best for the senior. So with that, let's wrap up here on our final slide. I hope that you found today's presentation both helpful and encouraging. I know we've gone over a lot, so I want, it's likely that most of you are working with clients and families who are facing some challenges that we've discovered here in this webinar. So I want you to take a moment to really think about what some next steps are for you. I've listed some questions here that might help with those next steps. So you're thinking to yourself, what are some action steps? How can you incorporate this information into your arsenal of resources? What are some things that you can do to help family caregivers minimize the sibling conflict while caring for their aging parent? And what resources are available to help ease stress between siblings? So I want to, again, thank you so much for joining me on this webinar today. And I hope that you all know that we appreciate all the work that you do helping seniors and their families. You're all doing a fantastic job, and we truly appreciate the hard work that you do. And again, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And next, we're going to open it up for some questions. So I think Steve said you can type the questions into the chat box, and we'll address them now.
Yes. That is true. Thank you, Lakelyn. Thank you very much for a great presentation. A lot of good information, as always. We also want to welcome Erin Albers to the line from Homestead Senior Care. So welcome, Erin.
Thank you.
And as Lakelyn referred to, if you have any questions, you can type them in there and send them to us, and we will get right to them. We do have a lot of questions already, so let's jump right into it here. The first question here, do you recommend facilitators for family meetings? And if so, can you suggest some appropriate services to do so?
Well, I think every situation is different, and sometimes a mediator might be the best option, especially if there is some high emotions, high stakes. So I would say that, yes, in those types of situations, a mediator is certainly a good idea. It could be depending on, the size of the community that you live in. I know some cities have geriatric care managers or consultants that you can reach out to, and even maybe a clergy member or someone outside of the family, a healthcare professional could be somebody that you could bring in, and that could really just facilitate the conversation.
Okay, next question. You were talking earlier a bit in the presentation about underappreciation, and this question refers to that. Underappreciation is also felt by those who are not primary and still involved but not recognized for what they are contributing. How does everyone get recognized and appreciated?
That's a great question. Yeah, I can certainly understand how some caregivers might feel that they are contributing and not being recognized. And I think, in every situation, like I said, it's so different. And so when families get together to have these meetings, making sure that the line of communication is open, and a suggestion I would have is maybe to, in those weekly meetings, talk about, okay, this last week, this is how I interacted with Mom, this is what I helped out with, so that the other siblings know, that their sister took Mom to the beauty shop last week and they had a really great time and took her out to lunch, or, the primary caregiver had a really tough week, and, Mom wouldn't take a shower, and they kind of had a tiff about it. And so by sharing their experienced that week or maybe every other week. It can bring to light how everyone is contributing to that family member's care. That would be my suggestion.
I think another part of that too, Lakelyn and everyone who's on the line, is for those siblings who are out of town, just knowing and understanding what they can do from being away from the situation, just empathizing with them, because it's very hard for them to be away from the situation and not be able to physically help, but reaching out to them for emotional help and thanking them for just being there and being that voice, because sometimes while they're not physically present, they're still emotionally connected. And I think that would be really hard for both sides. So instead of being resentful for that person for not being there, use them and thank them. Make them feel like they're still a part of what's going on with mom or dad.
That's a great point.
Okay, next question. When family members list the care recipient's needs, I often find that this list does not match what the individual may think they actually need. Do you have any suggestions on handling this situation when communication techniques are not working?
That's a great question. A lot of times when I'm meeting with families and seniors, I ask the senior first what they need assistance with, and then I usually ask the family members if there's any additional needs that they might have, and that's a tough one when the two aren't lining up. So I would say that. I might have to think about this one.
And another thing that we do is we do quality assurance visits. And so on those visits, we're able to assess the current needs that we're providing and able to have that conversation with that senior family, the caregiver, and able to tweak those needs as they come around. So if the senior feels like, you know what, I'm really not liking that you're having the caregiver do this, express that concern to the family. Or if the family says, Dad really likes it when your caregiver does that, let's do more of that. So the fact that we're going back and checking in, it's not like the needs you sign up for on day one have to be the needs going forward. It's that quality assurance that we provide, because needs obviously change and you find out what you like and don't like or need and don't need.
Yeah, I agree. And I talked earlier about how, just because you plan, to have that family meeting at the very beginning and make one plan of care doesn't mean that it's not going to change. It most certainly will change as the needs change. So that's a really great point, Erin.
Okay, the next question here. How do you handle verbal abuse that comes from one of the siblings?
Is that verbal abuse to whom? To the senior?
Not clear
be
from
specified?
The question. Yeah,
Okay.
Not clear from the question. So if the person sent that in, if you could send in a clarification, that would be great.
Yeah,
Let's jump on to the next one here. What suggestions do you have for caregivers that do not have siblings to share the load with?
I think that for those individuals that maybe have one child, or maybe they have no children and they're relying on a niece or a nephew, that's when those community resources are certainly something that they should tap into. Each community I know the community that I live in has a wealth of resources. So researching and finding out what types of services are available can really relieve the burden on that one child or that family member that's doing the workload, primarily doing the workload. So I would say definitely tap into the resources in your community.
Okay, this next one is kind of a specific situation, but I think it speaks to possibly everybody that is on the line. The situation, here we go. One family member has been requested to be the primary caretaker for a parent, but another child continually steps in and takes over, sometimes not communicating what they are doing to other family members. There is some resentment, I think, that this person wasn't made the primary caretaker, so she has assumed that role on her own without regard for her parents' wishes. So how should I address this issue?
Well, that's a tough one. Yeah, that can be hard because, in my presentation I said appoint a primary person, and if they did that and the other sibling is coming in and trying to take over, that can certainly create some conflict. And I keep going back to communication and over-communication, but if this particular sibling is kind of butting in and not telling other people what's going on, then that really can create some tensions and some family conflict. Erin, do you have any suggestions on this one?
Well, I would go back to the mediator, too. I mean, at this point, if someone's feeling that way, if it gets to a point where stuff isn't communicating and the senior may be affected by it, I would say as that primary caregiver, I would pull a mediator into this situation, have a little bit of an intervention of sorts just to get things really figured out. Because, Lakelyn, I was surprised I did not know that stat, but it makes sense about the depression of the senior when their choice of the primary caregiver is not respected. So especially in a case like that, if you look at the senior not enjoying the fact that another child is taking control of the situation when they really want someone else, like you said, the younger child. So that might be time for a mediator, absolutely.
Okay, and just to clarify, the earlier question about verbal abuse was towards other members of the family and or the senior themselves. So if we want to circle back to that one.
And the original question, can you repeat?
How do you handle verbal situations in verbal abuse in situations where it's directed toward other members of the family and or the senior themselves? That's a great question. If a mediator is able to be brought in that situation as well, I think that I know we keep going back to that, but that could be, a way to have kind of another intervention. If that verbal abuse is consistent and, directed towards the senior, if it gets to a point where it's escalated that, you might need to call in the proper authorities, then
Adult Protective Services.
Yeah, that might be the best if you tried a mediator, if you've tried, talking with that individual without the senior there, if you tried multiple forms of resolving that conflict and it's just not being resolved, the authorities might be the best option in that case.
Well, and a lot of times we see that with seniors who have dementia, when their children get very, verbal with them or they're frustrated with them. So it's really, again, having someone in there, having someone in the home, making sure that senior's best interest is taken care of and making sure that those siblings and families are looking at it from a standpoint of mom and dad and not one another.
Okay, another tricky question for you here. How do you encourage adult siblings to participate who have their own medical problems and or other reasons that they cannot participate in caregiving?
That is a great question. I know I work with a family, and the son has some extreme, medical conditions, and I think he's really an emotional support for that primary caregiver. While he has his own issues going on, he is really there for the daughter who's doing the majority of the care, calling and checking in and just talking to her. If she's having a stressful day, just being a listener, a listening ear. And while it might not seem like that person is doing a whole lot, they're not physically taking on some of the caregiving responsibilities, but, the emotional part of caregiving is huge. And if you don't have the emotional support, it can really make a difference if you have that emotional support. So I would encourage that person to kind of be that sounding board for the primary caregiver.
Or even help pay the bills or do things that aren't necessarily physical, but maybe they can handle some of the financial things. Like I said, pay the bills, make some phone calls, set up doctor's appointments, things that they can still do from their home if they're at home.
All right, next question here, and yes, yet another great question. I have found that there are some gender patterns in communication that can affect the effectiveness of care coordination. For example, some men have disengaged when communication has become too extended or too frequent. Do you have any recommendations in this situation?
That is a great question. I can certainly see in the clients that I work with, the daughters are usually the ones that are always communicating, and sometimes it's hard to get that adult son on the phone. But I find that the emails are a great way of communication for the male caregivers that I work with, and keeping it short and sweet and really just kind of hitting the highlights. And it is hard, when they become disengaged to re-engage them. But again, I would go back to kind of more of the short communication. And I, in my personal experience, I just find email to be a good way of communication for those individuals. Erin, do you have any?
Yeah, I think another thing we need to remember in a lot of these situations, we need to, as women, we need to tell them exactly what we need help with. We can't think that they are going to grasp that when we're going on and on about something that is stressing us out. We need to be very specific. I need you to come over and mow mom's lawn versus complaining about how long the grass is growing. So just, again, with those short talking points, put those actual needs out there. And just like any instance in a male-female relationship, we need to tell them exactly what we need from them and communicate the way they like to communicate, whether if they're a big texter or, again, I believe like email is great. But just in any way possible, don't be afraid to just flat out ask for the help.
Okay, another tricky question here. Do you have any tips for working with blended families? For instance, a couple who each have children from other marriages.
That is a great question, and I'm seeing more and more of that actually. It can be difficult when there's multiple siblings involved, and a lot of times in these blended families, the seniors got married later in life after they were widowed or widowers, and so the adult children might not really even know each other that well. But I think that's where those family meetings are really important in keeping those lines of communication open with one another and really understanding the needs of the senior and understanding the strengths of the siblings and how they can come together and in a more of a teamwork mindset to care for the aging parents.
We actually have a website called caregiverstress.com, and I'm looking at an article right now on blended families and how to talk through aging issues. It's part of another program that we built called the 40-70 rule on basically how to talk to your parents about their care when you're 40 or they're 70. But if you go on to caregiverstress.com and just search blended families, you'll see a really great article in there full of data and statistics and documents that you can download. So definitely keep that website as a resource for the families that you work with, because it's really where all of our information lives, and they can get a lot of stuff emailed to them, and it's just a great resource for you as a professional as well.
Okay, and real quick, we got time for one last one here. Where exactly would you access a mediator for some of these situations that we've been talking about? Would a geriatric care manager be appropriate, or do you have any other suggestions on resources for that?
I think that was the very first question that she had, and she definitely was right on there with the geriatric care managers, clergy, counselors, physicians.
Okay.
Did you have any other ones you mentioned, Lakelyn, that I missed?
Well, I mean, depending on the issue at hand, a financial advisor for the financial side of the conversation, a legal counsel for maybe those wills, estate planning, that sort of thing. Those can be a good mediator. So sometimes it might not just be one person. It might be, a couple different people that could help mediate certain portions of the caregiving, like the financials and the legal, that sort of thing.
All right. Well, Lakelyn and Erin, we are just about out of time. We have reached the end of our hour, but I want to thank you for a great presentation, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve, and thank all of you.